Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. It's my honor to chair this important workshop on Syria and the impact of the civil war in Syria on the global terrorism. I think that everyone in Israel and in Europe and practically worldwide is interested in this subject, which is a very, I would say, a kind of wound in the international community with so many people killed and so many people displaced and refugees, and at the same time provoking huge waves of terrorism. I have also the honor to present here a speech in memory of one of the most known Israeli officers which fell during the Second Lebanon War. And personally, I didn't know him, Emmanuel Moreno, his name is, but I heard a lot about his deeds, about his courage, and I'll read for some words of appreciation and memory by one of his very close friends, Colonel retired Leo Lotan, which was also a member of this elite force and was very close to Emmanuel, including during the battle when he was killed. So these are actually Leo Lotan's words. Emmanuel was born in France on June 1971 to Sylvia and Shlomo, and made Aliyah to Israel the following year with both his parents and his brothers. Emmanuel was raised and educated in Jerusalem and the Bnei Brit pre-army Mechina, which is a kind of course before the army, in the village of Eli. In 1990, he volunteered to the Sayeret Matkal, which is the elite combat unit of Israel, where he reached the rank of lieutenant colonel. During his service, he was trained for a number of highly classified tasks in the front line of his unit's activities, which required rare skills, character, and expertise. He also participated in numerous covert operations, including the abduction of Mustafa Dirani, which was one of the leaders of the Amal Shiite movement in Lebanon, responsible for the, if you want, taking hostage our pilot, famous pilot, Ron Arad, and afterwards selling him to Iran. Emmanuel was also involved in the operation to free Eliyahu Gorel, a taxi driver who was abducted in 2003 by Palestinians near Ramallah. During his service, Emmanuel graduated from our institute, the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, with a law degree, resided in Moshav Tlamim in the Lachish region on the border with the West Bank. He married Maya and became a father to 3 children, Avia, Neria, and Noam Israel. Lieutenant Colonel Moreno, Zichrono Livracha, was killed on Saturday, August 1926, in a special operation in the region of Baalbek in Lebanon during the Second Lebanon War. The IDF, the Internal Security Agency, have not to this day released his photo or any other identifying information to the public for reasons of national security, because he was involved indeed in very secret and very special operations. On April 27, 2008, the head of the IDF Intelligence Division awarded Emmanuel with the head of Regional Command citation for his numerous years of dedication to the security of the State of Israel and his participation in several IDF operations throughout the Second Lebanon War. Emmanuel was a man of deed and spirit, quality and virtue, a man of truth and humility, a true friend and a loving person, a man of faith who was connected to the people of Israel and to the Torah. During his funeral, which took place in the middle of the night, in a way best befitting a covert operator and a humble person, his squad commander said that Emmanuel was the best soldier in the world. Why? Because the IDF is the world's best army, Sayeret Matkal is the top unit of the IDF, our squad is the best one in the unit, and he was the best soldier in the squad. Following his death, Emmanuel's family established a non-profit organization called Bedarkei Emmanuel, in Emmanuel's way, supporting educational and leadership initiatives for youth in Israel. In 2008, a natural spring in Mevaseret Zion near Jerusalem was named after him. So be his memory blessed. Now we'll go to the subject matter, and we have practically six speakers. I think very known experts in the field of terrorism and also in the field of Middle Eastern studies. We'll try to finish all the presentations in more or less 2 hours without a break. Then we'll have a break of 20 minutes. And afterwards, we return for the question answers part of it. My name is Eli Karmon. I'm a senior research scholar at the IDC and also ICT, the International Counter-Terrorism Institute. My co-chair is Professor Joachim Krause from the Kiel University. I'll present him later on. We'll begin now the first presentation, which is Sectarian and interreligious strife in Syria as a catalyst for regional and global instability. The presentation, if you want, the speech will be given by Dr. Rateb Mohammed Amro, who is the Director General and founder of Horizon Strategic Studies in Amman, Jordan. He served as the Director of the Occupied Territories in the Jordan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and from 1997 to 1995, he served 20 years as Colonel in Jordan's Armed Forces. Dr. Amro received his PhD in political science from Ain Shams University in Egypt, and he is the author of numerous articles analyzing the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and its effects on Israel. Dr. Amro, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad to be here today, and I have to thank the organizers of this very fruitful conference to be here and to give me this opportunity to talk to these selected people. And I am so glad to see one of my best friends in Israel. He was ambassador of Jordan, Mr. Yaqub Rozain. Hi, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to ask one question, and I'll try to answer this question. Why the Syrian Spring failed? As you know, that the so-called Arab Spring, by the way, in 2012, in this place, I said that there will never be Arab Spring, there will be severe winter, and that's it. The so-called Arab Spring, which started in a number of Arab countries 4 years ago as a popular spontaneous uprising in pursuit of rights, a degree of happiness, has turned for the most part into either chaos or death and destruction. In Syria, a horrible, severe war is going on. The regime seems to be getting stronger, while the Islamist groups controlling a large part of Syria. And the opposition is not only hopelessly divided, but is being hijacked by these Islamist or jihadist groups. The uncertain Arab Spring aside, the escalating tensions, divisions, and conflicts are harming the region politically, economically, socially, and security-wise. One important lesson that we have learned during the last 4 years, that many Arabs used to doubt that democracy was right for the Arab world. Nowadays, and due to these crises happened in some Arab countries, they seem to doubt that anything other than democracy is right for them. Already this lesson is being learned in Syria. But why the Syrian spring failed, I'd like to share with you the following reasons. First of all, Iran, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Syria alliance. In fact, the Assad family is not actually Shiite. Iran has effectively adopted the Alawites into the family by establishing a long-standing alliance with Assad and before him, his father, Hafez al-Assad. A breakdown of religious groups in Syria, approximately 69.5% of the Syrian population is Sunni Muslim, Alawi 12.8%, Shiite offshoot that President Bashar and Assad follows, Christian 9.3%, Druze 3.2%, Shiite 3%, others 2.2%. But war changed the dynamic between allies, and Assad's gripe on power weakness, Iran and Hezbollah position in Syria grows stronger. Iranian and Hezbollah advisors are becoming dominant in Syria. It is no longer a situation where Hezbollah is just provided arms and intelligence, but appears to have mobilized and is fighting alongside Syrian regime forces. It is Syria that has become the epicenter of the hysteric battle between Sunnis and Shias. One of the challenges ahead of the several Arab countries is Iranians' intervention in the internal affairs of the Syrian and Arab neighbors, which giving power to some organizations and threatening the whole region. This imposes high challenge on the Arab countries, especially in light of the direct and indirect support that Iran is giving to Syria. As a result of this, Arab passivity, as well as of the inter-regional tensions and divisions, Iranians are doing their best to further their agendas and interests at the expenses of the region's security and stability. Through its misguided device policies, Iran has become a state in the region, contributing to more crises, divisions, and conflict. What is going on in Syria is an example. The Syrian government has long found Iran and Hezbollah to be useful allies. Iran is technologically advanced and offers a big market for Syrian goods. Hezbollah is a sword Damascus can wave over Israel's head, and a way to maintain influence in Lebanon. What about the Islamist or Jihadist groups? The news in the last 6 months about the forces of the Islamic State, ISIS, swiftly capturing Mosul and Tikrit in Iraq, in addition to terrorists already captured in Syria, should be a wake-up call to all. No country is safe in the region, and what happens in one country affects the neighborhood and beyond. In this context, the retreat is needed to address two specific issues: what should be done collectively to rein in and dismantle radical Islamist organizations like Islamic State, Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda. These groups and many others are not functioning in a vacuum, though they are definitely benefiting from the vacuum created by the weakening of traditional Arab states like Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Yemen before 2011. These organizations and others are getting support from countries within and beyond the region such support must cease. So it is time to wake up, and the Arab Spring will be no longer exist. What about the weak states and divided societies in the Arab world? Some Arab countries have always suffered from weak governments. They have gotten there in different ways. Yemen has been hindered by a lack of resources. The Lebanese state has been kept weak by elites, agreement, and then civil war. But however it occurs, the consequences of state weakness, the strengthenings of tribalism, and other sub-state identities are largely similar. The Syrian state is now suffering the same fate, eaten away by civil war, defections, and economic weakness. The nearly 4 years of fighting seem to have reversed whatever gains in the state building that Hafiz al-Assad had achieved. Public services have either collapsed or stretched to the breaking point. Law and order has broken down. Syrians look to their own sectarian communities for safety, not the state if they are not fleeing the country. The problem, of course, is not particular to Syria. Tribal, regional, and sectarian factionalism makes political progress in other Arab countries. With centralized state authority weakened, these countries have become the playing fields of regional local actors invite the foreigners in, looking to them for money, guns, and political support. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Qatar are all playing in Syria and Iraq. Saudi Arabia and Iran both support factions in Lebanon. The Saudis are still the monopoly players in Yemen and Bahrain, though they were darkly of Iranian meddling in both countries. This is a crucial dimension of the matter. Countries in the region, big or small, is interfering in the internal affairs of other countries under all kinds of pretexts and motivated. Such interference also has got to stop. Those who are instigators of interference today may easily become subject to it tomorrow. The wave of disorder and violence that is already picking up momentum and spreading in the region will not spare any the minute it is let loose. The most important principle here governing relation with an individual country and within the region is and should be coexistence. As has become apparent by now, while there are some gains or losses for this, or that political party or this, and that word or regional power, the peoples of the region are the biggest losers. Their aspirations and dreams have been hijacked. What about the American policy in the region? Let's be honest with ourselves. If the keys to stability and democratic development in the Arab world are related to state building and an ideological argument within Islamist movement, then there is not much that the United States can do to help these processes along. Washington demonstrated in Iraq that it is more skillful at destroying states than at building them. Even if we wanted to our overstretched military resources means that US priorities must lay elsewhere for now. The United States has even less to contribute to the intra-Islamist debate among brotherhood and Salafist trends under the name of democracy. Now here is America's inability to affect the direction of the internal political developments in the Arab world more evident than Syria. We have no history to close engagement with either the Syrian military or Syrian society. So the best that United States can do is to allow the Arab Spring to play out of its own terms. Weak and falling states, to be sure, are a serious counter-terrorism concern, and Al-Qaeda and its affiliates are sure to try to make an advantage of the field strife to revive their dying brand, see Libya and Benghazi in Libya. But these radicals are not about to seize control of any state. And the new governments in the Arab world will certainly see jihadists as a threat once they get back on their feet. And now it is started. Where does Russia stand on all of this? The Syrian civil war had huge implication for the state of international relations, and not just in the Middle East, but across the world. On an international scale, the Syrian conflict creates a complicated diplomatic situation, especially in terms of Russia-American relation as a long-term ally of the Syrian Russian as a long-term ally of the Syrian government. Russia has strong ties to the Assad regime and blocks the UN Security Council from allowing any foreign intervention against the current Syrian regime without their blessing. What about Israel? As Israel's strongest ally, the US has pledged to defend Israel if the country is put under any kind of security threat. This means that if the US took any kind of military action in Syria, the Syrian regime might retaliate with strikes against Israel, which could then propel the entire region into a much larger Middle Eastern conflict, potentially even drawing Iran into action. What is next? What happens if the situation in Syria continues as it is? Well, Syria is likely to become an even bigger battleground for proxy war between Hezbollah, Sunni rebels, government troops, Iran and Islamic organizations, and once Syria collapses, or even before, Lebanon could ignite as well. So the Arab Spring is dead and Syria is writing its apotheory. The leaders of countries in this region, those with shaky regimes and those whose regimes may become unstable, should learn how to live up to their people's expectations. If they don't, they may be facing, as after the Arab Spring, either another tsunami or popular discontent or the tsunami of extremists. At present, our region is back in the shadow of another nasty Cold War between West and East. With one difference from the last Cold War, we witnessed the infiltration of many Islamist organizations. At present, our region is in real danger. What we are witnessing now is much worse than all we have witnessed in the recent memory. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it is very important to hear the evaluation of a Jordanian expert because Jordan, which is one of the most stable states in this, if you want, Arab winter, is suffering not only from the point of view of the threat of violence and terrorism, but also is a country which accepted almost 1 million refugees, Syrian refugees, which is a huge burden. In a sense, it's also quite, if you want, a threat because the activities of various factions from Syria and from Iraq can influence the stability of Jordan. We heard also the importance of the sectarian fight between Shiites and Sunnis. I think everybody now is aware that this is one of the main reasons for the conflict in Syria and in other countries in the Middle East, and also the role of Iran. Unfortunately, I think that it was the best thing to combine a kind of workshop, the Syria, Iraq, and Iran issues together, but these workshops have been divided because so many people have to express their views. Now, the great, I think, surprise in the Syrian civil war has been an Iraqi movement or group, the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, or the Levant, which a year and a half ago, more or less, became actively and successfully involved in the fight against the Assad regime, but at the same time in fierce fight against the other rebel groups in Syria. And since June, I think 2014, this year, after occupying Mosul, all of a sudden became a threat to the unity, if you want, unity as such as exists in Iraq, but especially to the Shia government in Baghdad and to the Kurdish region. And now it has become practically an enemy of all the international community, and we see a huge coalition building itself in order to challenge the threat. So in order to speak about the rise of the Islamic State, we have with us Aaron Zelin, which is a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and also fellow at the International Center for the Study of Radicalisation and Political Violence in London. He is also a PhD candidate at King's College London, where his dissertation is on the history of the Tunisian jihadi movement. Aaron is dealing also a lot with North Africa. He was also the founder of a very known website called the Jihadology.net. His research focuses on global jihadi groups with a particular focus on Ansar al-Sharia in North Africa and the Islamic State, Jabhat al-Nusra in the Levant. He is the author of a study called The State of the Global Jihad Online, and a new study, June 2014, The War Between ISIS and Al-Qaeda for Supremacy of the Global Jihadist Movement. Please, Aaron.
Thank you for the kind introduction. So I actually changed the title of my talk to Remembering the Islamic State, not the Rise of the Islamic State, in part because I think it's important to step back sometimes when discussing these issues. A lot of times we get caught up in some of the moments of the day instead of remembering that a lot of what we're seeing now is very much a repeat of what we saw last decade. So I'm going to take sort of a historical look at what it means related to the Islamic State and how things have evolved over time. Just a brief history, you know, everybody's talking about the Islamic State, but in fact it's the same organization that has been around since around 1999 to 2000, which originally started as a Jordanian group with Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And he then went over to Afghanistan in 2000 and built up his training camps, and then ahead of the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 went into Iraq and started building up his contacts there. Because of some of the early successes, there was a marriage of convenience between his group and Al-Qaeda Central, and that's when they changed the name of the group to Al-Qaeda in the Land of Two Rivers, or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, as most people know it by. Then in 2006, there were many discussions at the time in the U.S. Political debate that the U.S. might withdraw. As a result, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the deputy of al-Qaeda at the time, was advising al-Qaeda in Iraq to set up sort of this proto-state potentially because they're trying to get ready for the potential U.S. withdrawal. Of course, that didn't happen. The Bush administration decided to do the surge, and the Sahwa movement happened as well. But either way, they ended up only about 8 months after establishing the Majlis Shura, or the Shura Council, the Islamic State of Iraq in 2006. While many are aware that the Sahwa movement was successful and that the U.S. helped consolidate some of the gains related to it, the fact is that the group was not strategically defeated. They're still around. And even after the U.S. left in 2011, there was still about 300 to 400 deaths a month in Iraq, which is still higher than the total deaths per month in Afghanistan. So in many ways, we looked the other way. I think part of it is everybody wanted to be done with Iraq just because of the way things went. Many people wanted to forget it, but the group itself still was remaining. And as a result, after the U.S. left, they started to build up some of their capabilities. And I'll get into a little bit later about how they were able to build that up through the Syrian uprising and then war. And then, of course, as many people know, they changed their name again when they officially entered Syria last April 2013. And then, of course, more recently when they announced their so-called caliphate, just calling themselves the Islamic State now. Just to get a little brief picture about what they conceive of what this Islamic State is as you could see up here on the map that all these borders that go across the Syrian Iraqi countries, and within them they have different wilayat or provinces. Of course, this is not necessarily a realistic portrayal of how much territory they actually control, but it's sort of what they're trying to put out there to make themselves look bigger than they actually are. And just a more recent note, they've created their own actual new province called the Euphrates province, which goes across the Syrian-Iraqi borders, which they're trying to use as a way to further their narrative that they broke the Sykes-Picot border, even though if they actually knew their history, the border was created at San Remo in 1920. And here is a more realistic view of sort of the territory. This is about a little dated, so there might be a little more territory that they control inside of Syria now, but it's really not that massive amount of territory they showed you in the first map. But it is still concerning since they do have contiguous territories over the former Syrian and Iraqi borders, I guess you could say. And then this is the broader grand plan, but obviously it's kind of, at least right now, appears to be quite fanciful since it stretches all the way from where the Uyghurs live in China, all the way up through West Africa, and then up into former parts of Europe and Spain and the Balkans, where there used to be prior caliphates within Islamic history. So that's at least their short-term or medium-term goals, I suppose. Just some of the reasons why there has been a resurgence over the last couple of years. As I noted, the American withdrawal helped out, though I would argue that that doesn't necessarily mean the U.S. should have stayed there, because some of the underlying factors which led to them becoming what they have been in the last 2 years or so is not necessarily related to the American presence on the ground. It's more related to local context in Syria and in Iraq. Further, even though they had a loss of territory after the Sahwa movement and the surge, they still continued a lot of their criminal enterprise activities, especially in the Mosul region, which allowed them to continue to raise money and fund over time and become more of a self-sufficient organization and not as reliant on private donors as we see with other Al-Qaeda organizations. And then I would argue that the Syrian jihad, what's been going on there since 2011, 2012, has been one of the biggest boosts to the group's ability to grow again, because they're able to get new recruits, new weapons, and new sources of potential funding, especially in areas that were taken over by them after they announced being in there in April 2013. And then another important aspect is related to the fact that in July 2013, there was a huge prison break at Abu Ghraib and a number of other prisons where a lot of battle-hardened individuals from the group, when they were under one of their previous names, that were arrested during the Sahwa movement and the surge, were now back out on the streets. So they got a lot of individuals back that had prior experiences fighting against the Shia militias, fighting against the U.S. forces, fighting against other Sunnis in Iraq, and therefore that gave them more knowledge base in that regard. And then in terms of the Iraqi context, I would say due to the basic grievances of the Sunni community against the Maliki regime, because they didn't really help out in integrating the Sahwa movement into the police force and the military afterwards, and their just general sectarian policies related to the Sunni community. You know, there are a bunch of protests over 2011, 2012, and over time, you know, the Islamic State has been able to take advantage of it, which first led to some takeovers of territory in Fallujah and Ramadi earlier this year in around January, February, and then more recently, as most people have become aware, since Mosul was taken over in June. So just to, you know, give a brief background about what we've been seeing inside of Syria and more recently in Iraq, is that while the uprising, you know, started in March 2011, and many sort of, you know, didn't really see the huge jihadi presence in there until maybe the summer or fall 2012. But in fact, from the beginning, jihadis were entering the conflict right away. July 2011 is actually when the so-called Free Syrian Army was first established, and that's when we actually first started seeing signs of jihadists entering then. And what happened then was that there was sort of conversations in the background between Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was then by then the leader of al-Qaeda, and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi about sending in individuals into Syria to start a new branch of the organization. We also started seeing only about a month later the first trickle of foreign fighters coming in. And then between July and January 2012, while they're building up their cells inside of Syria, they started also operating, and then they finally announced themselves as Jabhat al-Nusra in January 2012, which is probably the first sign that we started to see a wave of foreign fighters into the conflict. I'd argue that there have been sort of three key waves. Obviously, individuals have been going consistently, but there have been certain time periods when there's been more spikes. And one of the interesting things is Jabhat al-Nusra over time, you know, was able to ingratiate themselves with the local populations. They're doing dawah, social services, and similar activities like that. And many analysts were like, wow, maybe the jihadis learned the lessons of the failures last decade when they're extremely excessive and overtop in violence against everybody pretty much. And as a result, when the US designated them in December 2012, instead of people sort of distancing themselves, actually most, if not all, of the main Syrian factions in the rebel movement were really upset about this, and there's a whole protest against it, and they thought it was hurting the revolution. And then one of the bigger things that happened was in April 2013, which I already alluded to, was the Islamic State announcing that they're entering Syria officially, and pretty much saying what many people who follow closely already knew, that Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State were one and the same. But this, in fact, actually kicked off the fight between Jabhat al-Nusra / al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in many regards, because after the announcement by Abu Bakr or actually it was Abu Muhammad al-Nannani, the official spokesperson, the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, put out a statement saying that no, he wasn't going to be involved in this takeover, essentially, and in fact, it was a split between the two organizations and not necessarily a merger, as many people viewed it at the time. And this led to a lot of behind-the-scenes infighting between Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, but it didn't become overt until what we saw later on. Another key reason why we saw a rise in foreign fighters, and this is what I argue is the second spike, is the Shia foreign fighters joining the conflict. Essentially, Lebanese Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah, Sab al-Haq, Badr organization, as well as other Shia militias that have been involved on behalf of the Assad regime, as well as Iran's IRGC in the conflict. One of the things that really pushed Al-Qaeda in the end to distance themselves was that there was a huge rebel backlash against ISIS earlier this year in January, where a lot of the mainstream factions were able to push them out of Aleppo and Idlib governorate in January and February. And because of the failure of some of the reconciliation that was trying to go on behind the scenes between Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda officially, for the first time ever, disaffiliated itself with one of its branches, this time ISIS. ISIS would argue otherwise, that they really haven't been inside of Al-Qaeda since 2006, 2007. But if you actually look at how the relations went about, in theory, it could be correct, but in reality, they still continued to work together. And then, the most recent thing has been the takeover of Mosul and the announcement of the caliphate in June this year. And I'd argue that that has probably been the third spike in foreign fighters going in due to this so-called caliphate project that they've been involved in. As I alluded to earlier, one of the important aspects of why the jihadists, especially the Islamic State, have been able to do better, have been more effective in territories that they've been taking over, is due to the fact that they've been actually using real governance. I'm not saying that it's great governance, but they actually have been attempting to do it, because when they tried this, when they took over Anbar province last decade, it was primarily just law and order justice. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, and if you did, then you get your hand cut off, you get whipped, you get summarily executed, and anything worse down the line. But they've been able to utilize some of the lessons learned in other experiments related to jihadi governance over the last couple of years in Yemen, Somalia, Mali, and even the social service movements of Ansar al-Sharia in Tunisia and Libya in terms of what they have been doing. As a result, they're able to provide some basic services inside of the territories that they had been taken over, especially in Al-Raqqa province, more recently in Deir ez-Zor, as well as now in Mosul and other areas of Iraq since they took over the territories. And this is important to understand because many people are reliant on them now for these services. They might not necessarily like them, but they're reliant on them because they don't have any other means to get anything. And as a result, it makes it more difficult to then combat them, especially since many of these individuals themselves are not military fighters, so it's more difficult to potentially consolidate any gains within the community, even if there is a potential uprising. And that's one of the reasons why we saw sort of a I guess you'd say mixed bag, not a complete failure of the uprising by the rebels earlier this year. They did originally kick them out of Idlib and Aleppo governorates, but since then they've been able to expand back into Aleppo. They haven't been able to get into Aleppo city really yet, but they're back in the rural areas, and it's quite possible now that they might have an opening into Idlib now, actually, in light of the recent suicide attack, or alleged suicide attack, against the top leadership of Ahrar al-Sham last night. And then, okay, so just to sort of see where this is going now that we sort of have seen this trajectory, we've already seen actual attacks emanating from the Syrian-Iraqi zone. People are talking about blowback. We've already seen blowback. There have been attacks from foreign fighters that have gone over there to fight and then have gone back home. We've seen it in Tunisia, we've seen it in Belgium, we've seen it in Egypt, and we've seen cross-border incursions into Saudi Arabia, as well as some other countries that have been on a smaller level. It's also the unprecedented amount of foreign fighters obviously makes individuals worry about what could potentially happen, since as we've seen in past conflicts, that individuals that go train abroad, the chances of them being involved in a plot back home are a lot higher and more potent due to the new skills that they've acquired. While Thomas Heghammer has argued that 1 in 9 individuals have been involved when they've returned home, there's actually been some new research by an old boss, so I guess I'm kind of biased on this, but she actually argues that it's closer to 1 in 4 individuals that have been involved. So there is the potential worry, and it's coming from 90 countries now. This is completely unprecedented, and I list the different areas of the world where these individuals come from. Of course, some of these areas are a lot smaller than others and shouldn't drastically make some big inference related to the fact that I said Latin America, or even West Africa for that matter, since the large bulk of it is coming from the Arab world and Western Europe, the large part of it. And that's one of the reasons why many individuals in Western Europe are obviously worried about what's going on. So regionally speaking, the biggest pieces now, I would say that Lebanon is one of the bigger ones that we're starting to see, that you're really starting to see more of a push into Lebanon by jihadis, not just the Islamic State, but Jabhat al-Nusra as well, because they want to continue to make this seamless stream between these territories of this broader cosmic sectarian fight between the Sunnis and the Shia, because then it also hurts Lebanese Hezbollah's capabilities, potentially helping out the Assad regime in Syria, but also even their advising role inside of Iraq. Jordan is a big question mark, obviously. as many know, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was Jordanian, and they hit Jordan last decade on a couple of occasions. And some of the territory that they've held is right on the Jordanian border as well. Therefore, it's something that the Jordanians have been worrying about as well. And then, of course, one of the biggest potential prizes for the Islamic State, if they truly wanted to try and get legitimacy, is to take on the Saudis, who they see as the ultimate hypocrites and apostates. Obviously, the Saudis have air power that will make it more difficult for them to get into their territory, but it is definitely something that I think that they will try to do to delegitimize the Saudis as a legitimate voice within the Islamic world. And then we've seen individuals returning home from the Syrian conflict in Sinai, Libya, and Tunisia already, in part because of some of the fighting that is picked up in those locations themselves. And we've seen some of the tactics from the battlefield in Syria, in the Sinai more recently, related to Jamaat Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis. And then we've seen a number of Libyan foreign fighters going back to Libya as a result of the fighting that has picked up a lot in Libya over the last couple of months. And then, the Western Front obviously is a worry of many people, just because it's very easy to traverse back and forth. You don't necessarily even need to get a plane ticket, which would potentially put your name on a list. You could just drive across the border. And we've already seen a number of arrests over the past couple of weeks, if not months. And it's likely that we'll continue to see this. Of course, not every individual that's going to come back home will be involved in a terrorist plot. Some individuals might even be disillusioned. And there's already some signs of that based off of some of the work that Shiraz has done in the last week, I guess. So it's a tricky matter in terms of, dealing with individuals that come home and potentially providing an avenue or an exit ramp for individuals that no longer want to be involved in it. But we also have to be careful. But I do think that what we're seeing now is going to be around for some time. It's not going away. And it's something we need to be prepared to, deal with over the coming years, if not decades, because we can't necessarily wish it away as we wanted to in 2011. So that's what I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron, for giving us a very clear presentation about this important threat, the ISIS. I would argue, by the way, that the ISIS or ISI or Al-Qaeda in Iraq was never part of Al-Qaeda, because Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, which was the founder of this organization, from the beginning, he didn't want to be part of Al-Qaeda. He didn't want to swear allegiance to bin Laden, and only in 2004 he took from bin Laden the legitimacy to nominate himself or be nominated Emir of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The next week he called himself Emir of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Levant or the Sham, and immediately continued his strategy opposed to the strategy of bin Laden of attacking mainly the Shiites and not American and coalition forces in Iraq. But this is an issue, sorry?
And if you permit me,
yes.
The famous letter of Ayman Zawahiri to Abu Musab.
Exactly, yes.
Be careful when you pretend that you're killing the Rafida.
Yeah.
So it was 2004, 2005.
So I think the present organization actually continues the same tradition, by the way, including the beheadings, because Zarqawi began with the first American beheaded, and the cruelty, which in the end was counterproductive. And perhaps because of his cruelty, he was sold by his part of his people and killed by the Americans. Now, we'll begin to deal with the issue of external threats, not only Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and the other Arab states around Syria, but also far away. And to speak about the impact of the Syrian conflict on jihadist mobilization in Spain, but also in Morocco, perhaps generally in Northern Africa, we'll have Professor Fernando Renares, who is a chair in political science and security studies at the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos, and also senior analyst on international terrorism at the Real Institute Elcano in Madrid, in Spain. Fernando has a very long credentials. He was director of Permanent Seminar on Terrorism Studies at the Ortega Marañón Foundation and co-director of Master Online on Terrorism Studies at the Universidad Internacional de La Rioja. He, by the way, was fellow at the Jaffe Center for Strategic Studies at Tel Aviv University. He is fellow at ICT here at IDC. He was teacher at many universities, including Oxford University, North Carolina University, George Washington University. But interestingly, he also served as a senior advisor on anti-terrorist policy to Spain's Ministry of Interior following the famous 2004 and painful Madrid train bombings, and as chairman of the European Commission Expert Group on Violent Radicalisation. He is also editor of some of the most important publications on terrorism, like Studies in Conflict Terrorism and Terrorism and Political Violence. He wrote a long list of books and articles. The last book that I had the honor to review is about the analysis of the 2004 bombings in Madrid, 10 years after they happened, and Fernando proved that this was actually a pure Al-Qaeda operation and not a local, if you want, homegrown operation. And he is now editing with Professor Bruce Hoffman a volume on the evolution of the global terrorism between 9/11 and killing of Osama bin Laden. Fernando, my pleasure, my friend.
Thank you very much, my dear colleague and friend, Meli Karmon. It is a pleasure to be part of this workshop today. I will be very, very, very specific, just making a few points based on the framework that Aaron Selin has already presented to us, but looking in particular at my country. What happens is that usually I have better information on my own country than other societies, usually Morocco as well. But the data and the considerations I may present to you based on this case study might be relevant for other countries, other scenarios. And of course, all these issues about conflict areas where people from the West in general and Europe in particular go and potentially with the idea of returning and doing something is already an experience in my country. No less than 5 of the no less than 27 individuals who made up the Madrid bombing network were previously in Afghanistan or in Bosnia. And some of them were not just once, but twice. Not just the basic training, but a more advanced one. So we know what this is all about, certainly in my country and within Europe, more than in any other country. So I decided to make just 3 points. We might discuss other issues later on, but just 3 points. And so to speak, a macro point, a meso point, and a micro point. My macro point is the following. When I look at my country, when we have some, for sure 35 people went from Spain to Syria/Iraq to engage in jihadist terrorism activities. I'm not including here the individuals who went to fight alongside the Free Syrian Army, initially, no longer. So we know for sure about 35 individuals. We know that it is almost the case for some additional 13. No less than 3 died while perpetrating suicide attacks there, were killed, and at least 3 others have already returned to Spain. This is to mean that we can speak about some, around 50 people. 50 people. and this is a quite accurate number. To many of you, it might sound a low number. The figures are about the same for Italy. So my point is, European countries where Muslim population is basically or predominantly composed by first-generation immigrants are being less affected by jihadist mobilization now, but this jihadist mobilization related to the Syria-Iraq conflict than European countries where the vast majority of Muslims are mainly second and even third generations. And I can prove my point also with respect to Spain, but just in a few minutes. This will lead us to think that in those countries where what you have mainly are second and third generation, identity crisis is at the bottom of the vulnerability that many young people exhibit towards radicalization and recruitment by jihadist organizations active in Syria and Iraq. And in fact, most of those around 50 individuals I just mentioned who were radicalized and recruited in Spain and went to Syria and Iraq are, for the first time in our history, Spaniards in the vast majority of the cases. We never had this before. Never, ever. Yeah. If you were yesterday there in my presentation, I made it clear that all the individuals convicted or died in Spain as from 1995, when the first jihadist was arrested in my country, until 2012, were foreigners, but 5% who were Spaniards, who were born in Spain. Now, over 60% of all those individuals arrested as from 2013, just with respect to the Syria-Iraq conflict, are Spaniards.
You mean converts?
No,
No converts?
Spaniards, Muslim Spaniards. We just have one convert. Muslim Spaniards, basically living in the two Spanish enclaves in North Africa, Ceuta and Melilla. This is why it is for us so easy to link what happens in Spain with what happens in Morocco. But I'm speaking about second generations as well, our only second generations, in fact. In people in between 16 and 30-something who are descendants of Moroccans who established in Ceuta and Melilla in the past. So interestingly, outside Spain, this mobilization is affecting more, considerably more, statistically far more, countries such as Germany, France. Yesterday, I thought I heard wrong at the beginning because officially statistics are 700, but the judge was clear to me. No, it's 900. It's 900, and not just jihadist networks everywhere, Somalia or Northern Africa or the Middle East. Not just individuals who went to Syria and Iraq. Around 900 individuals from France, and the vast majority of them French, of Northern African origin, but French nationals of Northern African. This is why the Moroccan authorities say we estimate at this moment something in between 1,200 and 1,500 individuals, Moroccans who had traveled to Syria and Iraq. But in addition to this, we also take into account the over 2,000 individuals who made the same trip to Syria and Iraq from Western Europe and are descendants of Moroccan families. So I think this is an important issue to consider. As I say, not only because by comparing what's going on in Spain with what's going mainly in France, that is the France and the UK, the countries we compare often with. The best explanation we have is this identity crisis that is affecting so many people among our second and third generations, and you know, the Islamic State, when you talk to some of them in Spain, no? I was recently arrested in Spain. When you talk to some of them, for instance, they refer to, I cannot quote those things now because legally I'll still under summary secret. No? But some of them, they talk about, you know, Al-Qaeda is no longer anything more than just propaganda. The Islamic State delivers. They control, they do, they govern, as Aaron say. But when you recall everything they say, just by extracting this from individuals arrested in Ceuta and Melilla over the past 2 years, what it becomes very, very clear is that nowadays Al-Qaeda is offering these people membership into a clandestine organization in not easy formats, recluded in Fatah or under very hard conditions in northern Mali, with some potential to do something in the future, but it is extremely risky for you to. Well, this is what Al-Qaeda is offering them, but what the Islamic State is offering them is something they're very different. The way they perceive it is something. The Islamic State is, they say, is offering me to become part of a society, of a new society. Not used to be a member of an organization, to become part of a new society. So they call me as an engineer, they call me as a doctor, they call me as an ordinary man. They ask me to bring my family. We enjoy the end of Ramadan in such a way. I mean, they have, like the American guy that in this famous video, you know, sometimes I didn't even have what to eat in Florida. Now we have plenty of food here for you to enjoy. No? They are offering something which is extremely attractive to many of those people, and it's not just the invitation, Al-Qaeda's invitation to feel that you are part of the Nation of Islam, is to be part of the society where this is becoming true, or where they think this is becoming true. Okay, this was my macro point, which I insist seems to be validated by the fact that even inside Spain, where we have low numbers, precisely those low numbers correspond to second generations, mainly. My meso point. I read, even from friends who are not here, but I read also often that this Syria-Iraq conflict is impacting jihadist networks in the West in such a different way, that new networks are emerging and shielding all these new facets. We had 4 police operations in Spain over the past 2 years, 4 main police operations in Spain over the past 2 years, concerning jihadist networks, radicalizing and recruiting individuals to be sent to Iraq and Syria, initially both to Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State. It all depends on the affiliation of the facilitator who was there in the Turkish border to bring you inside. Now this is no longer the way, because they tend to travel through North Africa and not via Turkey. So they They are radicalized and recruited in Spain or in Morocco, trained in Libya, and then they move through Egypt into finally Syria and in Iraq. But the idea is that these 4 main police operations in Spain, in all 4 cases, are connected to previously existing networks. For those of you familiar with collective action and social movement literature, you might have heard about the concept of abeyance structures or structures in abeyance that are there. You have a main important operation and you arrest a lot of people, but some of them will remain there and start to do something out of that whenever opportunity arises. I tell you, the Madrid bombings have a lot to do with this precisely. The dismantling of Abu Dhabi's Al-Qaeda cell left 6 people unarrested, and those 6 people were the entrepreneurs of the Madrid bombings as from late 2001, more than 1 year and 4 months before the invasion of Iraq started in 2003. This is important to keep in mind. Not necessarily all networks, but abeyance structures that are reactivated, seizing the opportunity provided by the Iraq and Syria after they failed with respect to northern Mali, because northern Mali was a failure concerning radicalization and recruitment of people. Northern Mali was not offering what Syria and Iraq is apparently offering these people. Now, the networks, in the case of Spain, are in 3 of the 4 cases I just mentioned are Moroccan Spanish networks. And Morocco is not the most affected country in Northern Africa, in the Maghreb in particular. You know, the most affected country is Tunisia. 22 per 1,000 Tunisians went to Iraq and Syria, and only 3.5 out of 100,000 Moroccans went to Iraq and Syria. The interesting thing in the case of Morocco is that most of them come from just 5 cities. The same 5 cities that were a problem before the Casablanca attacks. The same 5 cities where jihadist preachers had been working. So it's not just in terms of networks, but in terms of jihadist potential. I mean, of course, I'm talking about this area in the Tingitan Peninsula in northern Morocco, who's the closest to Spain. My point at the micro level, in addition to stress that because of this general issue concerning second generations identity crisis and the attraction of the Islamic State. By the way, it was a time when Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State, they started to engage in this intra-jihadist fighting, when many people, including myself and intelligence officers in my country, when they thought that we were about to see a decline in mobilization levels. It's not taking place. It's not taking place. Is this, for instance, is this among Moroccans affecting the poor, the deprived, the excluded. Certainly this is not the case. Same as in Spain or in Europe in general, we see that people with college background and people with primary education is recruited. In the case of Morocco, we observe an astonishing diversity among individuals who mobilize. Certainly, 70% of them are between 25 and 45. And 30% are under 25. So it's very continue to speak as in the past about young people. In the case of Morocco, it's interesting that we find 4 out of every 10 were small traders, 26 were manual workers, and only 2 out of every 10 were unemployed people. 9% students. This is not that different from an occupational distribution of the population of those same cohorts inside the country. A point connected with networks. 2 out of every 10 individuals who went to Iraq and Syria from Morocco were previously arrested and imprisoned in Morocco for jihadist activities. And the vast majority of them, more than half of them, were actual real leaders in the networks and cells that radicalized and recruited these people and moved them into the Middle East. And I think that those were those are the 3 points I just wanted to make. Maybe if you want some more details, we might discuss the analytical relevance of this and other data. We might also during the questions and answer period. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fernando. I will continue the discussion indeed. Now I'll pass the chairmanship to Professor Joachim Krause, which is a professor of political science and chair for international relations at the Institute of Political Science at the Christian-Albrechts University of Kiel, Germany, and also professor of German studies at the Paul Nietzsche School of Advanced International Studies and Johns Hopkins University, also in Bologna Center. He held a lot of teaching tasks in Europe and in the United States. He is member of the Council International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, and since 2001 he is chairman and 2005 member of the executive board of the Aspen Institute in Germany. Dr. Professor Krause studied at the University of Bamberg, University of the Armed Forces in München, and University of Kiel, and he is a doctor from the Free University of Berlin. Joachim, please.
Yeah, thank you, Eli. This was a very long CV, but I have even had longer one. Last year when I was in Sri Lanka, I was introduced for 10 minutes, and I said, okay, I realized that I'm getting older. You know, reading out my CV takes longer than my whole presentation. So I promise to you I will make short presentations here. So we have now got a very interesting presentation by Mr. Reinhardt on, how foreign fighters are, the dynamics of foreign fighters coming from Spain, or Spain, Morocco, Tunisia triangle. We will now turn to Mr. Shiraz Maher, who will speak about European foreign fighters in Syria, who they are, what they do, and what threat they might pose. And I want to shortly introduce him. He is a senior research fellow with the International Center for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College in London. He also researches the development of Salafi ideology, jihadist organization in the broader Middle East. He has published widely and his research is frequently cited in the media. And he has also interviewed members of the Taliban, of Al-Qaeda, and Jabhat al-Nusra. And I'm looking very much forward to his presentation. You have the floor.
No, just about. Thank you. So I wanted to talk about foreign fighters in Syria, as it says on the slide, why they go, what they do, and what threat they might pose. Before I do that, just to give you a quick overview of the structure of the presentation. I'm going to really break it down into 4 parts, the 3 that I've just mentioned. But before I do any of that, I think the Syrian conflict has posed a number of challenges. It's not a conflict where we can go on the ground, get inside the country. We've seen the challenges faced there. And so how do you begin to produce research that is empirically sound, to have data that is very rigorous, that can produce meaningful results? And I think a lot of us have been kind of making it up as we go along. It's so new. And so, you know, we've very much been part of that process ourselves. And I wanted to kind of share with you very briefly our kind of research method to say, in essence, how do we know what we're talking about? How can we sort of show off some of the ways that we've been working with social science to try and produce meaningful outcomes? So that's just our office. So what does ICSR do? We sort of broke it down into 4 sort of basic ideas. We said open source intelligence, which is sort of well known. Social media intelligence, looking at Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Ask.fm, and Instagram. And these are, in and of themselves, really pretty remarkable platforms, actually, if you can begin to mine the information on them and marry them up for individual fighters across different platforms. We go to the ground and talk to fighters without really entering Syria. And I mentioned that at the bottom of the fieldwork. And we talk to them using Skype, WhatsApp, Kik, Messenger, and platforms such as that in order to have a discussion. As Aaron was mentioning, so just last week, in fact, a group of British foreign fighters who are in Syria right now contacted us saying they want to come back to the UK and they want to find some kind of common ground with the government to make a deal of some sort in order to facilitate that. So it's a two-way conversation between ourselves and them, and it's allowed us to get a real insight into the ground. So we were, again, one of the first centers to confirm that it was a British suicide bomber at Aleppo prison, and so on. So it's, we find it gives us a lot of access. We've started creating a database at the start of the conflict to catalog Western foreign fighters. So that's anyone from Europe, North America, and Australia, essentially, who have gone out there. We currently have about 150 confirmed male foreign fighters that are logged, about 53 women, and the 400 who are suspected. And we collect 72 separate data points per foreign fighter. Obviously, we can't fill in each data point for every person, but we do as much as we possibly can. And this kind of gives us an insight into them. And I cite a study here which says, you know, what does it really mean? I mean, this is a question we had amongst ourselves. What does it mean to like something on Facebook? What does it mean to follow someone on Twitter in and of themselves? Is any of this meaningful? So here's a study which mentions that easily accessible digital records of behavior, such as Facebook likes, can be used to automatically and accurately predict a range of highly sensitive personal attributes, including, among other things, religious and political views. And the larger your community, so given that we're looking at a community here of foreign fighters, the larger that pool is, the better those insights become, but the better is the conclusions that you can draw from that. So we started to play around with some of this, and just to see what we could do with it. And this formed the basis of one of our reports, but I'm just going to give a quick example of it here. We looked at who follows a foreign fighter. So this has direct application. If you are, let's say, in law enforcement at a practical level, how do you begin to work this out? So the slides have kind of obviously inverted these numbers. They should obviously be 1 to 5, 6 to 10, and so on. But if you look at it, somewhere just over 17,000 people are following between 1 and 5 foreign fighters. We don't regard that as particularly significant. But then from 6 upwards, you see the curve comes right down. So if we drill into that bit, you see the numbers are much smaller here. It's just over 600, and you start to come down. Now, a lot of those are other foreign fighters who are following their friends. Some of them are journalists and researchers, so you can exclude them. But then you're left with a pool of people who you can see are quite clearly heavily invested in this for one reason or another. Either they're likely to go, and they're attempting to reach out to different foreign fighters, or they are disseminators, people who are aggregating lots of information about the conflict and essentially serving as fanboys on the internet to get different bits of information out. So we found that quite an interesting sort of tool that we sort of developed in the process of doing this. And, oh, sorry, it's the wrong way. And if you stick it into these lovely network graphs, they look very nice. But you can also begin to visually identify people. Exactly. You can begin to identify individuals within it. All the red guys are ISIS fighters. The purple is Jabhat al-Nusra. And then the gray nodes are people who we're saying are attempting to communicate with them. And obviously, given the size of people, you can identify on the right-hand side people who are close to ISIS, who are following a lot of ISIS fighters, who are probably likely to go. So who goes to Syria? And that's the basis on which we are producing a lot of our work and attempting to at least give it some sort of empirical rigor rather than just a sort of anecdotal approach. So who goes to Syria and why do they go? We identified a number of reasons why people are going, again, through our conversations, through the things these guys are saying. Some of these reasons have become less prominent over time, actually. So political reasons, well, there was a sense that the scale of the humanitarian suffering and the brutality of the Assad regime, when we were talking to these guys at the start of 2013, that was a thing that came up a lot. And in that same context, there was a sense of the pragmatic attraction. It was seen as the good war. It wasn't seen as a particularly contentious issue, either politically or morally. Even legally, in fact, it wasn't seen as contentious. The government hadn't really said much. No European government had really begun to make a big deal of foreign fighters going out to Syria. And so at the start, they felt, well, we're not going out there to fight British troops or American troops. There's no Western involvement on the ground. We're going to fight Assad, and our governments are against Assad, so it's okay. And there was a sense of naivety amongst them. Religious reasons, the Ummah consciousness, the idea of defending fellow Muslims against oppression and tyranny, of course, featured very heavily in this. And the importance of Syria in normative Islamic theology. So I mentioned this hadith which talk about the importance of Syria, the Sahabi buried in Damascus, Khalid bin Walid buried in Homs. So all of this resonates in terms of the importance of the land to them and the huge priority they attach to that. Lack of counter-narratives, so very few counter-narratives, at least even in the context of the Iraq War, which was deeply unpopular in parts of British Muslim communities and Muslim communities across Europe. There were still people who were saying, fine, be angry, be agitated, but lobby your MPs, work through the political system to make your voice heard, that kind of thing. In the Syrian context, there hasn't really been a great counter-narrative that's been out there to dissuade people who are otherwise inclined to go not to do so. And I mentioned the final point, ease of travel. You can take budget airline flights from the UK and travel out to Syria. It's very, very easy. It's cheap to do. And once you're on the ground, as we discovered ourselves, getting over the border is a formality if you want to do it. So this is some of the propaganda sort of posters that have been coming out of Syria. Just to give you an idea of how the sort of communicating, messaging to a lot of people who they want to inspire to attend the conflict. I think the top left one is very funny, but it's very powerful as well in a very simplistic fashion. It's this idea that now is the time for action. What are you doing? You have personal agency that you should come and engage in the conflict. So it's a typical profile of someone who goes. Based on what we've put together through the database, this is UK specific, it's not a European picture, but it's some of it's applicable. Broadly, they're men, they're in their 20s, usually in their early 20s. They're of South Asian ethnic origin. They have recent connections to higher education, and they have connections with groups or individuals that have international links. And by this I mean they're kind of not even necessarily always an extremist organization, but certainly conservative activist groups, sort of street dawah organizations, that kind of thing, and so on. We've also seen an unprecedented number of women that want to go. I think that's very unique in this context, but we are seeing lots of women starting to go. And we estimate currently from the UK between 500 and 600 people to have gone, and 250 or 260 returnees to the UK. So 260 odd people back in the country who have fought already out in Syria and they have combat experience. Only a handful of them are in jail or, under surveillance. And so there needs to be some sort of public discussion, which hasn't yet happened, about what you do with returnees. And it's a belated debate. Looking at the types of people that go, we've identified, or we've created kind of a typology here of 4 types of person that goes out to Syria. So the first one is known radicals. They've had a long-standing association with radical groups. People like Anjem Choudhury and his network, for example, lots of his comrades are out there. So these are known radicals. They've been at it for quite some time. You have the humanitarian activist person, like I said, the guy's principally gone out there motivated by what they see as humanitarian suffering. And they have a background, again, it tends to be slightly sort of longer history of activism and humanitarian work, but it's also very Muslim-centric. So they go to Muslim hotspots where Muslims are perceived to be in crisis or suffering under sort of a natural disaster or something, and they'll engage there. You've got the martyrdom seekers, the guys who literally going to Syria with the sole intention of dying and dying as quickly as possible, believing that this is a shortcut to paradise, eternal redemption, saving themselves, their families, and so on. And then there are a number of people with criminal backgrounds who are there for, partly because they're skipping bail, but they're also there because it appeals to their sense of masculinity, sense of adventure, and that side of it. So to classify, and the reason we make this point is you can't look at all the foreign fighters in the same way. They are a broad spectrum. I mean, there are thousands of them out there, and we need to unpick who's who in order to work out who we can work with. I mean, the humanitarian activist guys, some of them are clearly not of the ISIS variety. So I'm just showing you some pictures of the types of these people. So this is someone with a radical association. It's the first British suicide bomber. He'd been picked up in the past on the periphery of terrorist plots in the UK. A long-standing association with extremist radical activity in the United Kingdom. Here are the activist kind of jihadi. So this guy, just here, and on the top right, wearing the red top, is a guy called Iftikhar Jaman, probably one of the most famous British foreign fighters in Syria. He one of the first that we contacted, and very willingly actually gave an interview to the BBC from inside an ISIS training camp, and hence he became sort of quite a mythical figure. But not a radical per se, not in the UK, doing lots of street dawah, handing out copies of the Quran to people, what's the meaning of life, do you believe in God, that kind of thing, but wasn't ever connected to that kind of Anjem Choudhury network. And when we spoke to him, we had long interviews with him. He said, his concern was the women and children. He went out there to save these people. So we kind of put him in that activist background, but of a type. Here's another activist who is a lot more radical. So in the top picture, he's in Pakistan doing aid work there. The one there where I've circled him, he's on the Mavi Marmara, the flotilla to Gaza. And then this one here at the bottom, he's in the Atma province of Syria. So he's a different kind of activist jihadi. And then this guy is basically a criminal. He's a drug dealer, but decided to go out to Syria and to fight, and encouraged his wife to come and join him. And she's just recently been prosecuted in the UK for attempting to take a large amount of money out to Syria to give to him. So what do these guys do in Syria? What are they up to? I mean, this slide is actually a lot like the one Aaron had up, so I won't spend too much time on it. What are they doing? Well, they're fighting on the one hand, which is obvious. But they've also learned the lessons. They've realized that they have to provide social welfare provision. So they do religious lessons, they distribute food, they ensure people have access to utilities, to healthcare, they guarantee food supplies. Whether the government puts sieges on places, they try to break the siege. It's all about showing and saying to the people, look, You know, we're here to help. And in fact, I think this is one of the points that doesn't get so stressed enough. We see the brutality coming out of ISIS-controlled areas, the guy who's been crucified in the square, the guy who's had his hand chopped off. But for the average ordinary citizen, even if they don't like the Islamic State, in places like Raqqa, they've delivered security after a few years of terrible insecurity. And there's a sense of people wanting to get back to normalcy. And so they're saying, okay, we don't like these guys, but I can go to the shops now and not worry about the regime arbitrarily, you know, arresting my son and him disappearing. And that, it lends to the support that ISIS gets. I've got some pictures of them doing sort of charitable stuff just to show you. So this is not the Eid just gone, it's the Eid before in Aleppo. And they did a tug-of-war competition for men, a pie eating contest for kids, sort of showing the people that they're with the community. And so again, this is from Ramadan, giving out sweets and drinks, and then again, ensuring people have meat to eat and that kind of thing. But let's not sort of, look at these guys who rose tinted glasses. This is a British foreign fighter who is from London. He went to Queen Mary. He's a smart guy. And so he tweeted this picture that you see in the top left. Got these criminals today, inshallah will be killed tomorrow. Can't wait for that feeling when you just kill someone. 3 prisoners of war he's holding there. And then a few days later, on his Facebook, you see obviously the middle picture, his hand with the blood, my first time. And then the final picture from British, sort of largely British media production company operating out of Syria, Rateb, it says Fi Sabilillah, in the path of God. So you've gone from those guys to his private picture to the propaganda poster that's then being put out and marketed. And it sort of shows the desensitization of these guys, the brutality, but also underscores the fact that foreign fighters from Europe, from Britain, from the West, they haven't gone out to be backseat drivers in this conflict. They are very much at the forefront of it. They want to be at the forefront of it, and they are engaging in all the worst excesses that are taking place out there. So, are they a threat? Well, here's a few things. We said there's no real overarching picture just yet. We have a few cases, Aaron mentioned them, of returnees coming back and doing things. But at the moment, we don't have a massive pool of data on these individuals. Even the 260 I talk about in the UK, and they're very, very difficult to get to. They're very difficult to know who they are. We said in the short term, from a European perspective, in a sense, the threat and juggling it is a sort of the dichotomy between the urgent versus the important. And that is to say that someone who is inclined towards engaging in jihadist activity today, the messages he's hearing from ISIS are saying, come here, be part of the state. So he wants to leave the country and travel out there to be part of that state. Whereas go back to 2010 or 2009, and you were downloading Olaki videos, and Olaki was saying, do something at home. Don't come here, read this stuff, attack in your own country. Today they're saying, get out of your country and come here and be part of the Islamic State. So in a sense, these guys are going out, so the immediate short-term threat could actually be perceived to decline in that short period. In the medium to long term, of course, it's a much harder issue. You can tell this slide's slightly out of date. The current narrative is not anti-Western in tone. Well, it wasn't until they started executing Foley, and then from there it's become more contentious. But ultimately, it wasn't such an issue in that first phase until then. They weren't talking about the West so much. They were talking about Assad, they were talking about the Shia, they were talking about Maliki, they were focusing on the sectarian dynamics of the conflict in the region, and they were telling people to come out and support them, rather than, as I say, going for that old school message of saying, attack at home. One of the big problems in terms of, we think, returnees is also not just treating them as a security threat, but providing psychological support. These guys are very, very young. A lot of them display signs of combat stress because they have no psychological support when they're out there, no one to help them. And we've seen with our own professional armies how difficult it is to ensure that soldiers' mental health is protected in these conflicts. And so we really need to think about this. But I think the last bullet point is probably the most harrowing one, and it's probably the most significant one in terms of long-term assessment of the threat, which is you have the repopulation of a terrorist network. One of the key things in the post-9/11 campaigns have been to ultimately unpick the global Al-Qaeda network, either by killing them, capturing them, prosecuting them. It was ultimately unpicked and decimated in every meaningful way, and exists only in a sort of nominal fashion. What you've had now in Syria is truly unprecedented. The scale of foreign fighter mobilization, the scale of different nationalities and countries where people have come from to get involved, and you've recreated this Jihadist international, essentially, that is going to be very, very difficult now to unpick. It's going to be very, very difficult to pacify and to begin to shift in some kind of benign fashion. So that recreation of that international terrorist network, the repopulation of this terrorist network, the so-called Afghan effect, is, I think, a huge challenge that will face European societies, Western societies, and more broadly the world for some time to come. It's been mentioned before, the Hegghammer study. I haven't seen Ita Clausen's study yet. You should send it to me. But it's 1 in 9 is the... Oh, you did? Well, I've been busy. 1 in 9 is the figure that's sort of out there at the moment, saying that these guys become terrorists. But even that 1 in 9, so it's important to say it's not the majority, it's not everybody. It's still a number that we need to be concerned about. It's still a number that we need to be thinking about. It can pose a clear problem. I mentioned that I used the UK figure. If we say the low end, 500 people have gone from the UK to become foreign fighters, using the 1 in 9 model, that's still 55 terrorists back in the UK. And they recruit people, they inspire people, so you can see how this grows exponentially. But Ita Clausen makes the point as well that when foreign fighters come back and they mobilize in their home societies, their plots are more likely to succeed, that they're likely to be of greater magnitude and to take more lives. So these are very important individuals from that perspective as well, that compared to the homegrown jihadi who's never gone abroad, he might be able to construct something, but it's not as likely to be as effective or to make as large a boom, essentially. British foreign fighters have been a problem in the past. So this is one of the arguments that's come out. There's obviously a culture war taking place in the UK between people who want to support these guys. And they say, look, there's been foreign fighter mobilization in Bosnia, in Chechnya, in Libya. There were no problems. The two things to say in response to that. The first is the scale, the intensity, and the sheer number of groups and the brutality of groups like the Islamic State in Syria is just simply unprecedented, is beyond anything we've seen in the past. And it's also not true to say, in the British context at least, that there have been no problems. 21 terrorists convicted post 9/11 in the UK have had some previous connections to conflicts in the past, and Diram Barot, who I mentioned there, and Omar Sharif, of course, as well. So these guys have long-standing histories with previous conflicts. On that point of them saying, look, we're no threat to the West, don't worry about us, we came here to fight Assad. They say that on the one hand, and then they produce posters like this the very next minute. And so, again, it sort of, there's a real disconnect between what they'll be saying and maybe what they genuinely believe at that moment. But there's clearly a lot of sort of background focus, at least, on the United States. And that's obviously coming more to the fore right now as Obama sort of, I suppose, gears up to do something. We'll see quite what that is. Here's another poster, again, glorifying the Woolwich murder of drummer Lee Rigby. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, aim to inspire that kind of attack again. So, again, sort of doesn't help their narrative when they're saying, look, we're good guys, we came here to fight against Assad. Here's another British foreign fighter. His account was shut down precisely because he was sending out tweets like this. So he says, all the guys in this Aqidah and Manhaj who want to make hijrah, please just do something in the West, chop someone up, please retweet this. This guy's from Hounslow. He's particularly nasty and vociferous individual who seems to have gone quiet now. Oops. Here's another just sort of final example from Ask FM of a foreign fighter who died just a couple of weeks ago, talking about wanting to do something with planes against the US, and so clear reference there to 9/11. Final point is, ultimately, in this context, let's keep it in scale. Of the foreign fighters that go, the vast majority want to stay there, they want to die, they're not going to come back. So not going to be a problem for us. And that's me, so thank you.
Okay, thank you for this very interesting presentation. So we had two presentations on foreign fighters in Europe. Before that, we had two presentations on the situation in Syria, and now we have two presentations who try to give a more broader strategic assessment of how things will go on. The first of them is the Ambassador Dimitar Mihaylov. He is the ambassador of Bulgaria in Israel, and he talks about sectarian and interreligious strife in Syria as a catalyst for regional and global instability. A few notes about his CV. He is a diplomat, but he's also someone who has studied Arabic language at Damascus University in 1989. He holds a PhD in ancient and medieval history of the Department of Arabic and Semitic Studies of Sofia University. He has written books, so he's not just a diplomat, he's a scholar, and I think this is an interesting mixture. And he was, until June 2012, ambassador to Syria, where he was declared persona non grata. Ambassador Mihaylov, you have the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. לפני שאני מתחיל, ברשותכם מילה אחת בעברית למפקד עמנואל, זיכרונו לברכה. Now I can switch to my presentation, and I know that we are moving ahead with the time, so I'll try to squeeze it. I'm a sitting ambassador, I'm not a researcher, I don't work on this field, so these are, rightly so, you put me at the end, because these are more food of thought for you, reflections that may collect my memory as somebody who lived in Syria, who spent 14 months by the end since the start of the civil war. And as a historian also, I try to grasp the meaning of the context of the events in Syria in overall history of the Middle East, because sometimes we are very much mesmerized by the details, so we miss the forest from the wood. In a short journey, in 10 minutes, I'll go over 5 points: Sunni-Shia relations in history, how I view them, what went wrong in Syria, the threat of sectarian and interreligious confrontation. Then I will move to the Shia Alawi, because of course there's difference between Alawite religion is completely different than the 12-er Shia or the Ismaili brand. Then I'll try to grasp the Sunni landscape, and again, I don't pretend that I'll give the objective picture. This will be my reflections, and then I will have a conclusion, hopefully after 12 minutes. So first, Islamic history is complicated, but my understanding is that never there has been a clash purely on Shia versus Sunni. Of course, if we follow the narrative of the historians, we have several problems. We are not sure that these are the authentic events. You know that Patricia Krohn and Michael Cook and Yehuda Nevo from Israel, they introduced the sense that Islamic history is somehow fabricated, but we have to trust and we have to accept what is in the context of history as truth. So we have the first fitna and the second fitna, ending with the revolt of Ibn Zubayr in 692. So these were the turbulent events that shaped the fracture between Sunni and Shia. Then, of course, I mentioned the Saladin overthrow of the Fatimites, because Fatimites were in Egypt and Northern Africa, so they were forming an immense Shia presence in the Middle East. By the way, they came from Tunisia, they were ruling Egypt, but they spread their influence to the Holy Land of Islam, Mecca, Medina. So somehow till the 12th century, the picture of Middle East was very different than what Middle East is a shifting sense between Sunni and Shia. Consider that the Iran was Sunni country before 1501, when Shah Ismail introduced Shiism as an official creed in Iran. So I wanted to give you this sense that it is not about Shia Sunni, it is not about the religion. The borders in history are very much blurred we cannot say that in history there was a classical clash, 30 years war, Protestants versus Catholics. No, this is, in my humble opinion, this is not the picture. Of course, I mentioned, and here you see the two signs of the Ottoman and Safavid Empire, but they ended with the Treaty of Zuhab in 1639, which defined somehow the borders between the Shia world and the Sunni world. But again, these were imperial clashes. These were geopolitical clashes. These were not clashes based on Ottoman fighter fighting the Safavids. He was not obsessed with the zeal to fight the Shia Rafida, so to say, what Abu Musab Zarqawi was introducing. And the problem comes with modernity. It comes with the Wahhabi movement, with the third ruler, Abdul Aziz ibn Muhammad ibn Saud, who attacked Najaf and Karbala in 1801 and desacralized, profanized the shrines of Hussein in Karbala and Ali ibn Abi Talib in Najaf. So from now on we have this picture of somebody who is coming from desert, but this has in prehistory. And prehistory is the Persian Empire, which is the civilization, versus the nomads, who are coming from the desert. So, bottom line, it's a complicated picture in the Middle East, in the Arab world. In Pax Islamica, it has never been Shia versus Sunni, as was the case in Europe Christian world. So when we come to the causes that made the Syrian conflict so severe, I briefly mentioned that from the very first beginning, the regime wanted this to appear as a terrorist. I've been in contact with some people who were very close to Bashar al-Assad, so I know how they thought, I know how they planned. They were very much afraid that this is a peaceful movement like Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement or Mahdi. And when protesters were telling Silmiya, Silmiya, they were very much afraid. So from the very first beginning, I knew that they were trying to erase these demons with Islamic taste, and actually they succeeded. On the other hand, you have the opposition. In a certain period of my career, I've been dealing with the so-called Syrian opposition. It's a complete joke, and I knew that these people were good for nothing. They were fighting between them, so they were not able to produce a stable alternative to the regime that might unify the forces on the ground, the so-called Free Syrian Army later on. So it was a complete failure. And on the other hand, you have the complete obsession of Khamenei to keep the Shia crescent intact, to keep the brothers in Lebanon connected via Alawites, the Alawite regime. So Iran, another big country, Iran played crucial importance in this construction. And of course, with the beginning of 2013, we have the appearance of Jabhat Nusra. It's what I say, a classical Al-Qaeda example. And we have really a jihadi appearance on a Syrian soil who just note that traditionally the Islam in Syria is a Sufi, mystical Islam. It's not a radical Islam. But we have several countries in the Middle East when we have this transformation whereby the traditional classical Islam is supplanted by more radical forms. And this is the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous phenomenon in this case. And I mentioned the great scholar Ibn Khaldun, his sense of asabiya. This is a sense of belonging, tribalism to a tribe that is currently in Syria. What is the difference here between Syria and Iraq? Because in Iraq also you have sectarian or religious confrontation. But the ability of Iraq when it comes to this disintegration, Matzaf it Porerut it Khalkut, to influence, Iraq will most probably influence the Gulf area, not the area that is Lebanon, Jordan, Mediterranean area. Bulgaria, of course, Eastern Europe, and the rest of Europe. So Iraq has some similarities in the context of religious confrontation and sectarian confrontation, but its ability to influence is far less than the one of Syria. Of course, Shia in Iraq, I mentioned most of the factors, they were never united, and Iranians were playing with them like in chess game, putting one against the other, putting Muqtada Sadr against Abdulaziz al-Hakim. So bottom line, what we see in Syria is that it's very strange. We have Alawites, we have Shia Twelvers, we have Houthis imported from Yemen, but somehow united in what I said in an article in Bulgaria, what resembles Spain in 1936, 1937, when you have these inter-brigades bringing communists, anarchists, fighting against the Franco. So we have something similar and very dangerous, and even I came across of this concept of jihad in Shia lore, in Shia literature, modern Shia literature. And of course, jihad is absent in classical Jafari Shia tradition because jihad should come when Mahdi, the final Messiah, comes. So you have an ideological transformation in Shia world, which brings them together, united, and put them on this line. Then, for the Alawites in Syria, it became it started, of course, the regime, we cannot say that the regime is purely Alawite, but the regime succeeded to convince the Alawite community that this is an existential threat, and these are the Sunnis that are coming to kill us and annihilate us. So the Alawite community became doomed and believed in that future, that if they don't fight in this existential so-called threat, they'll be annihilated. On the other hand, I see what I may say Shia mass propaganda on internet, on papers in Husseiniats, and I mentioned that Shia conscience is very strange because all the events in the past I started with, the great fitness from the past, they are projected in the presence and they live in presence. It's one-dimensional conscience. It's not diachronic. They live with events that happened in the past 10, 12, 14 centuries ago as it happens right now. And of course, you have the central role of Sayyidah Zainab's shrine near Damascus. There are several important Shia shrines, but these are also connected with historic trauma, how Wahhabites are coming from the Arabian Peninsula, destroying these shrines, and after a while you will see how that happened in Syria. Of course, I mentioned the main Shia factors. I would put accent on Liwa Abu Fadl al-Abbas. This is an Iraqi militia. Now it's not present in Syria because they retreated after the Islamic State became prominent. But again, you have different militias united, everybody coming to Syria to fight and to absorb volunteers. As far as shrines are concerned, Zainab was daughter of Ali, some 10 kilometers from Damascus is very important, but you have Ruqiyya, who was a small child in the middle of Damascus. You have a cemetery in Damascus where all of these who followed Hussein in Karbala, most of them are buried. It's a very important shrine for them. Nukta Mosque in Aleppo, where they say that drop of the head of Ali fall there, and you have a mosque in Raqqa, and you have a mosque that you will see after a minute what happened with it in Andra. Andra is some 20 kilometers from Damascus. And of course, you have two reasons for Shias to fight in Syria. One is to defend shrines, and the other one is to defend communities. Like the Nazis, they said we have Sudeten community, we have another community. So we have to fight to keep our communities. In Syria, we have 2 towns close to Aleppo, and in Basra Sham, used to have friends there. I know the Shia community there. But these are relatively small communities. In my humble opinion, shrines are the most important factor in Shia propaganda to attract people to fight. And here is Hujr ibn Ali, who was a companion of the Prophet, who fought for Ali. And in Adra, it's not established, but a Wahhabi group, they went there, they destroyed the shrine, they dug the grave, and they buried him because in the Wahhabite tradition, you should be buried in an unnamed grave. Even the Saudi royal family, they bury in an unnamed grave. So they took the bones of the poor guy. We don't know if they were authentic.
Without DNA.
And without DNA, and then they buried them. So here you see the nightmare scenario of the Shia. Somebody is coming to my shrine, be it in Karbala, Najaf, or Sayyidat Zainab, and doing that. And this is the most radicalizing force when they work with, in their ta'amula, propaganda. On the other hand, Sunni military landscape is really complicated. On one hand, you have Daesh, which is, as rightly mentioned here, extension of Tanzim al-Tawhid wa Jihad al-Qaeda fil Iraq of Abu Muslim Zarqawi. This is an extreme global radical mutation of a global jihadi Salafi concept. And we have Jabhat Nusra, which is, I would say, more moderate or more classic, that reflects the classical Al-Qaeda doctrine. Second level, you may say that these are the Islamic front. These are Islamists who could not share, most of them, like Islamic front, they fight with Daesh. They share very, very general view, but they are not in extreme. Of course, here we have to mention, and it was mentioned here yesterday, something important happened in Idlib area. Somehow an operation took Hassan Abud and several of his commanders. So this is a very important event. We have to pay attention to that. We can compare this to only one event in modern Syrian history. On 18th of July, when a big explosion took Asif Shaukat and other in a compound of the regime. So please pay attention to this event. It's very well operationally planned, and it will have a very lasting effect, since Hassan Abud, he represents, of course, Ahrar al-Sham. He's a leader of Ahrar al-Sham, but he represents precisely this trend. He is an Islamist, but not sharing the extreme ideology of a radical Salafi jihad. Ergo, he is prone in the future to join a future Islamic state or another Syrian state. And finally, we have the remnants of Free Syrian Army and Syrian Revolutionaries Front of Jamal Malouf, who could be seen as a more secular. But again, borders between these three layers are very relative. You can easily be one like Abu Khaled Suri, who was representative of Ayman Zawahiri, and by the same time, you're part of Ahrar al-Sham. So if we look at the ideology of this jihadi Salafi landscape, I tried to read. Of course, I couldn't be comprehensive, but doctrinally, these are classical, I would say, Qutbian, Sayyid Qutb, concepts that they share, and in the sense of Sharia, of course, ISIS, Daesh is more to the extreme, because Daesh, they behave like already a state. They try to impose hudud, which are juridical punishment. They treat other religions like Dhimma, and they imply excommunication of takfir that goes back to Ibn Taymiyyah, so to say. And of course, most of them, I mean Nusra and Daesh, they accept that jihad, this is a personal obligation. Some of you who are interested, you know that this goes back to Abdul Salam Farag, the neglected obligation, and not jihad as an obligation of community, fardul kifaya. Then finally, why this picture that I try to construct very briefly is dangerous for the region, is dangerous for Europe and the world. After July, August 2012, in my humble opinion, the Syrian conflict crossed its Rubicon, so there is no way back. Any attempt to reconstruct or to reconcile the Syrian political factors is doomed to failure. Second, Syrian social structure, Syrian society, I lived in that society and I have many memories, is unraveled beyond repair. It means that this society that has been in formation for hundreds of years, which resembles a mosaic, not in Iraq. Iraq is rather a sandwich. You have 3 layers, but Syria is more complicated. And for hundreds of years, it kept moving ahead with delicate balances between different group of people is damaged. It won't be repaired. Religious and sectarian and ethnic divisions, they were always there, but somehow they were kept. Now they are open and they will take their way in a very dangerous development. And again, why I started with history, because this is the first time in history that we witness from a historian point of view a real Sunni Shia ideological clash, which is motivated not only politically or geopolitically, but rather ideologically. Therefore, I try to present what is the mindset of the radical Shia and mindset of radical Sunni fronts. And of course, infection, for the weakest point is Lebanon. My sense is that now Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah, they are very much apprehended and afraid that if Daesh comes to Arsalan and Tripoli and enters into the Bekaa Valley, it will be disaster. So Lebanon is very weak point. It could be affected. Jordan is weak point, and hence also the rest of the area and the world. And of course, here my colleagues were talking about how the boomerang of jihad may hit Europe and America. Thank you very much. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. This was very insightful. It was a little bit longer than 12 minutes, but we enjoyed it very much. So the last speaker of today will be Dr. Eli Karmon. He will speak about sectarian battles and shifting alliance. I don't have to introduce him here too much. He's a senior research scholar at the ICT and a senior research fellow at the IDC in Herzliya. You have the floor, Eli.
Thank you. Okay, I'm very glad that Ambassador Mihaylov has spoken much more about the Shia element, because I think it's very important to understand what's happened there. The foreign fighters, we speak only about the Sunnis. I think that the Shia threat of dissemination of fighters is as big as the Sunni ones. And therefore, for the first part, I will stress this threat. If you look to what happens on the regime side, it's not only the army of Al-Assad. You have on the right the black flag of the Pasdaran, of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, Iran. They have some 1,000 to 1,500 fighters and commanders. They don't fight, but mainly they are training not only the Syrian various groups or the national defense forces, they also are advisors to the Syrian army as strategists. They are also the connection between Hezbollah and the various other Shia groups, which speak especially the Iraqis and the regime. So they are extremely important. And they have, as you know, the Iranians are very, very known as proliferators of terrorism and supporters of terrorism. And we have the Hezbollah here, which have at least 4,000 to 5,000 fighters inside Syria. Now, if we look to the two flags of them, what is the front? What are they fighting? Are they fighting only for Syria, for Lebanon, for Iran? They are fighting all the globe. From the beginning, the strategy and the ideology is to conquer all the world, or to Islamize all the world according to the Shia faith, or according to the Khomeini's doctrine, which is a revolutionary, if you want, Shia doctrine. Now, Hezbollah was hurt by its involvement alongside the regime, because they were very popular after the Second Lebanon War. They were considered to be the victors in the fight against the IDF in 2006. But now, you see, in Lebanon, they are shown as a wounded fighter and not a big fighter like they wanted to present themselves. Now, if you look to the Iraqis, there were at least seven important groups. They said that they were fighting for the Zainab tomb, but actually we saw more and more in Aleppo. They were there because they were asked by the regime to support the liberation or the reconquest of Aleppo, which is a very important strategic asset for the, somebody which controls it. And it's true that some of these people returned to Iraq because, by the way, also some Hezbollah specialists were sent to Iraq in order to support the Iraqi Shia regime and the Iranians in the fight against the ISIS in Iraq itself. But besides this, by the way, we have Afghanis. It's said that the Iranians have recruited with money refugees from Afghanistan, Shia refugees in Iran, and sent them to Syria. There are Houthis which are fighting against the Sunnis in Yemen and are supported by the Iranians. There are probably also from Southeast Asia. For instance, Hezbollah in the past recruited people in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. What I want to prove is that part of these fighters can proliferate outside the Middle East. Because, for instance, after our intervention in Lebanon from 82 to 85, there was a kind of emigration of Shiites from Lebanon to South America, to the Triangle region in Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina, to Maracaibo in Colombia, to Iquique in Chile, and they became the infrastructure of Hezbollah, which was responsible for the famous attacks against our embassy and the AMIA Jewish building in Buenos Aires, 92 and 94. They emigrated to Sierra Leone, to the it's called it's the morphine, Ivory Coast, and they are the nucleus of the Hezbollah and Iranian infrastructure in Western Africa. So I think that after this war, we'll see also a lot of people from Iraq, from Hezbollah, Lebanese, Syrians, which will go to emigrate like the Sunnis, and they will become the future infrastructure for Hezbollah and the Iranians. Now, there are those which are more or less neutrals. We don't know much about them. For instance, the Druze, which are some support the regime, some support the opposition, but actually they want to be neutral and to defend their rights and their security. And in a case of dismembering of Syria, they can become some kind of independent or autonomous canton. You have the Kurds. The Kurds in Syria are very important in northern and northeastern Syria. They already formed 3 cantons, an autonomous region, which is called Rojava. They are cooperating and sustained by the PKK, the Kurds in Turkey, and they were in some conflict with the Kurdish autonomous region in Iraq. What happened with the ISS activity against, or massacres of Yazidis, Kurds, they produced actually the reunification of the Kurds in Syria, in Iraq, and in Turkey. And this organization, YPG, was one of the most active in Sinjar and is helping the Yazidis not to be massacred by the ICS. So we see how these kind of groups are cooperating and forming other forces inside Syria and Iraq. And by the way, the Christians, we have Christian militias on the side of the regime, especially in the Alawi region and in Damascus. At the same time, we have a Christian militia, which is cooperating with the PKK and the YPG in the Kurdish territory, because they see, by the way, that the ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra are attacking them. So they are united in this kind of Rojava territory to fight those enemies. And you have the Free Syria Army, which wanted to be a very important, if you want to see a diagram, they had 5 fronts, they have a lot of commanders, they have a lot of support, by the way, but actually nothing serious resulted from this, because I think also the Western support, the American and European support, came too late, and also because outside Syria, most of those which were organized as an opposition were Muslim Brotherhood, which politically they were very active outside Syria, but on the ground, inside Syria, they didn't have really true support. And if you look again to this kind of Islamic or Islamist coalition inside Syria, we see the first coalition, serious coalition. The Syrian Islamic Front was formed in 2012, in the autumn, 2012. There were some 7-8 organizations. They reunited inside, they split again. And when the regime attacked with chemical weapons in August 2012 and killed 1,400 people, all the groups, together with Al-Nusra and ISIS, united against the regime and against the American plans to try to obtain kind of deal with the Assad regime under Russian-American umbrella. And this was in September 2013. 2 months later, they split again. They split again, and we have now a new organization called the Islamic Front, which also is very important. By the way, Ahrar al-Sham was the main player, and 2 days ago, or yesterday, most of the leaders of this organization were killed by probably the ISIS or the regime. We don't know, yes, probably. And this is the Islamic Front. You see how complicated it is. By the way, we see here 7-8 organizations. Actually, on the ground, there are 900 groups and subgroups. Every neighborhood practically has a warlord, or every village or biggest village has a warlord. In Aleppo or Damascus, dozens of groups that unite and form this kind of groups, which then have kind of umbrella organization. Jabhat al-Nusra and Islamic State in Iraq remained outside of this coalition until Islamic State in Iraq decided to fight against all of them, and Jabhat al-Nusra decided to be independent. And at that moment, Jabhat al-Nusra began to unite on the ground, depending on the conditions, with other groups, including the more moderate groups, against the ISIS. But what's interesting here is the greater picture, the strategic picture. We see all of a sudden, in November 2013, 2 months after this big organization was formed, okay, Saudi Arabia changing its strategy. Because until September, October 2013, there were 3 countries supporting practically the opposition. Turkey, which supported mainly the Muslim Brotherhood. The moment the Muslim Brotherhood did not give the fruits, they didn't deliver the goods, they began to support also Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS. No recruiter or contraband or smuggler of ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra was arrested in Turkey until 1 week ago. 2 trucks with weapons were found by the Turkish police belonging to Turkish intelligence with weapons for ISIS. You see, it was very strange that police is arresting the intelligence services. It was very, very difficult for Erdogan, the prime minister, to explain this. And by the way, probably they gave some kind of free passage to the ISIS. The second group country that supported was Qatar. Qatar supported, according to sources from Qatar, with $3 billion. And they supported more and more the Islamist groups. And this provoked the growth of Jabhat al-Nusra and especially of ISIS. In October 2013, the Saudis decided enough is enough. This is a threat to us. And you see how they published this kind of caricature and laws. There is a law against financing terrorism and fighting in Syria. There is a law against those which are going to fight outside. And clearly there is a law and outlaw of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra inside Saudi Arabia for the first time. And the attempt to build a kind of independent army, Islamists, moderate Islamists, they thought that Jordan would support them and Pakistan would support them, but probably for the moment it didn't work. Now we saw this kind of a map. In the north, the yellow, it's the Kurdish, very important, by the way, territory. And we have here the regime which controls mainly the the coast and the big cities, which is very important for them. Because if we see, this is the strategy of the regime. The regime understands that they cannot reunite Syria. So the main effort is to have this kind of territory, big canton or country which is Alawi and Shia in Lebanon, including Hezbollah in the Bekaa Valley in the northern. And that's why you have today the fight of the Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS inside Lebanon in the region of Arsal and Tripoli, where the Sunni are the majority. And this is the Golan Heights. Here you see for the first time, we see Jabhat al-Nusra on our border, together with more moderate groups, on the border also to the south is Jordan. But strangely, when there is a coalition to fight ISIS, nobody is fighting Jabhat al-Nusra, including not Israel. Because how Israel is permitting these groups to be on our border inside the Israeli territory. If you saw the television yesterday, 2 days ago, not only they are close to the border, they are on Israeli territory, which is between the fence and the border. Because the fence is not exactly on the border. And still our forces are not firing on them. I think this is one of the very strange decision of the Israeli government. Let's see tomorrow after tomorrow, because what they are doing, they are trying to provoke the Syrian army to fire on Israel, or in this direction, to fire on Israel, and Israel will respond and retaliate against the Syrian army. That's what happened the last 2-3 weeks or 2 months. And no attack against al-Nusra by Israeli forces. These are the foreign fighters. We spoke about them. We spoke later about it. And here, again, we see the strategic picture of those countries around which are interested in the future of Syria and of Lebanon, and the possibility that they will have an Alawite state with some kind of part of Shia Lebanon, and perhaps even something that the Druze state is possible. Most of the experts think it's not possible to provoke. And here we saw already how the Islamic State or the Caliphate is present in many of this region, but they are not, besides the big cities and the roads, I think they are not controlling really the territory. In my opinion, the coalition that the Americans fought now as forming, they will destroy the military infrastructure of this Islamic State, probably also in Syria. But what will be the result? The result will, they will return to classical terrorism. They will go to revenge their defeat on the military field in Europe and the Arab countries. And if you look here, kind of Italian colleagues that so these are in red, the Shia, the Sunni, and in, if you want, in those which are supporting the Assad regime. You see, you have on the one hand, Al-Qaeda is Sunni, but they are fighting the Americans. Qatar is in conflict with Saudi Arabia and with Bahrain. Turkey is supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. At the same time, they are supporting Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS. All is very, very complicated, very complex, and this coalition, although it will fight the ISIS for a short period of time, in my opinion, will quite quickly disintegrate, because for the moment, the interests of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar are completely different. And this is how the Middle East could be in a not so far future. But what is very interesting, and this is the last week, what happened is that Ayman al-Zawahiri decided to form a new organization of Southeast Asia jihadists, which includes Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, and 3 states in India, Al-Assad, Gujarat, and Kashmir, where there is a big, in Kashmir there is a majority of Muslims, in Assam and Gujarat a big minority of Muslims, where there were a lot of massacres of Muslims in the past. But what's interesting, he says we want to revive the Islamic Caliphate. And who is the emir of this organization is Mullah Omar of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Without saying it clearly, this is clearly a fight against the Caliphate of Baghdadi. This is, by the way, Boko Haram in Nigeria already, although they hinted they are very glad to be part of the coalition with the ISIS, declared the independent caliphate. And I think there was another caliphate which was declared several days ago, I don't know, in Yemen or anyway, clearly here we don't have unity of vision inside the jihadist camp. And the fight between Ayman al-Zawahiri and Baghdadi is now on the 2 fronts, if you want. Clearly, for the moment, ISIS is stronger in the Iraq, Syria, and Levant, if you want. And Ayman al-Zawahiri, with the support of the Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban, is able to, at least to control this part of the world. But I think that they will try to subvert Baghdadi, especially if Baghdadi will be militarily defeated by the Americans. So I think that, again, this kind of picture is very complex. We'll have a lot of fight between the various interests. Nobody is exactly sure not to be touched by the threat. At the same time, the shifts in the strategy, in the coalition will be very quick, possibly, and we see very strange things which already happened until now, but I think we will have a lot of surprises also for the future. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's now the privilege of the chairman to declare a short break of 50 minutes, and after that we will reconvene. Thank you. We have about 20 minutes time to discuss the many presentations. I hope we will survive that, because this is the coolest room in the whole Middle East, I guess. And complain. Yeah, let me make a short resume. What I learned from this session is that the state of Syria is dead beyond repair, and there's hardly any new feature developing. Nobody knows what is the future. We will see ISIS or Daesh is creating a caliphate. That is, they are going a step beyond everything that extremist organizations of that kind have so far gone. That is, creating a new state which is not the same kind of state as we know, and we don't know whether they will be successful. In particular, after US President Obama has said we will destroy that state, but we don't know how successful it will be. Another thing I've learned is that ISIS or Daesh has an extreme magic. You know, they are attracting foreign fighters and foreign supporters from all parts of the world to a degree that has been unparalleled so far. And the question is, what makes the magic? How many members they have? You know, no one told us, and maybe that our panelists can tell us, how many members has Daesh or ISIS, as we call it. How many of them are fighters? You know, I saw 1 year ago a figure of 2,000 fighters. Today the figures are around 20,000, 30,000 or even more. I also wonder why our intelligence services have failed so much. No intelligence service was able to predict what has happened during the past few months in the north of Iraq. I just recall that the head of the domestic intelligence service in Germany said we were totally surprised by this. Neither we nor our friends in the Western world were able to predict this. So these are all elements, which mark question marks for me. And what would be also the strategic consequences of what is happening today, what we see in Syria, what we see in Iraq. I got more questions than ever before. And also as a European, I ask myself what we have to fear most. Is it really the returning foreign fighters, or is it something more, that is a major reshuffling of the political landscape in the Middle East? In particular, I wanted to learn what our Israeli colleagues are thinking about this, because you are in the middle of this region. We are a little bit...
Without a crystal ball.
Without a crystal ball, but what are your, the ideas you have, at least the hypothesis. So these are the questions I have, and I hope that some of the panelists could answer to this. But the floor is open for questions from you, but could you please, when you put a question, identify yourself? Absolutely silence.
Courage.
No, there's one, yeah. Yeah, Ambassador Rosen.
I don't carry the breast. I'm working on this phenomenon of foreign fighters, mainly from Europe and the Pacific Rim and Northern America, especially on the converts, Christian ones. And my thought is, my temporary, current analysis, it may change in the future as things develop, that it becomes a cultural phenomenon. And that this is something which has been dealt and researched not by CT counter-terrorism experts, by sociologists, gender experts, because we have also female foreign fighters, some of them Muslims, some of them converts. We have already hipster foreign fighters, Islam icon, the Egyptian guy, 25 years old from Cairo. He was until 2 years ago a student of law and bodybuilders, has very nice squares on his body, and now he's going with this beautiful, fashionable spectacles. And I believe that CT is the last link in the chain of research of the foreign fighters phenomena. Why it happens, it's, I just wanted to make a remark. But we should look at it as a cultural, psychological, social. Many people are exposed to atrocities. They will suffer in the long term from post-traumatic syndromes, one or another. No one knows when it will explode, how it will explode, and most important, as Europeans or North Americans, who is in charge of dealing with those things? Is it that security should be in charge of it, social services, whoever? This is just maybe to give you a little bit of color after hearing those awful things which we were exposed to just now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you indeed. More requests for the floor? No, that's not the case. Yeah. Wait a minute. And then could you identify yourself?
And we talk a lot about the foreign fighters from Europe, from the Middle East. And are there any Chinese fighting in Syria who can tell us?
Okay. Are there more questions? Then I would ask our speakers, you know, would you start? Shiraz?
Yes, I don't know a great deal more about them in terms of, I don't think there's a critical mass. I don't think there's a huge number of foreign fighters from China there, but there are some. Aaron, any more details on that?
In terms of the Chinese fighters, the government has said that there are about 100 individuals that have gone, though I've only been able to personally identify about 30 to 40 on a specific videotape from the Turkestan Islamic Party's Bilad al-Sham branch, I guess you could say. So they're definitely there and fighting, and there was a report that one Chinese individual was actually arrested inside of Iraq, I think last week. So they're very much involved in it. And as far as I can tell, the vast majority are from Uyghur descent, though there have been some Han Chinese involved as well, but not too many.
Aaron, could you answer me my question? You know, how many fighters Daesh has, how many members?
Honestly, the number of fighters total is very difficult, just because it's so fluid.
Yeah.
And honestly, you know, I'd be worried if it was a large amount. But the thing is, they're able to do so much with such a small amount of individuals anyways. You know, I find the numbers game kind of not necessarily relevant always, just because there are like 100,000 people that are allegedly part of the Free Syrian Army, but what did they really accomplish? I mean, yes, they were able to do stuff at the beginning, but they weren't able to get past a certain point until, you know, more of the, you know, Salafist forces in the Islamic Front were able to do stuff, as well as Jabhat al-Nusra. So, you know, we could talk about certain numbers, but at the end of the day, if you have a really well-trained force of a small amount of individuals that could do well on the battlefield, I find that just as significant as somebody that has a large quantity, essentially quality versus quantity. You know, I've seen estimates from 10 to 20,000, but I mean, it's really difficult to know specifically, especially as people sort of join up after they take over territory and likely coerce individuals to join them, or otherwise they'll kill them.
Yeah.
But there have been some cases where some individuals have left the organization in Iraq, even in the last couple of days, but also in Syria as well. So it really changes a lot. And then you also have to take into account the most hardcore of the supporters and those that are sort of just a part of the group, either for economic reasons or they don't want to get killed. In terms of the most hardcore support, I'd say it's probably 5,000. But, you know, again, it's just a guess. I don't know for sure.
Okay, if it's the qualitative factors, what are the qualitative factors which make them so superior to other forces there?
I mean, they have an actual strategy, a
Yeah.
military plan, and they have military individuals and trainers that have been able to create a specific plan. And it's not just about one battle here and there, but they have an overarching idea. I mean, they've been planning this out for a couple of years, I think. Obviously, they didn't necessarily see things going the way everything has come about, but they've had contingency plans, also have taken advantage of a number of opportunities as well. So I think that's a lot of it. And just, you know, we shouldn't necessarily build them up as the greatest military force either necessarily. I mean, part of it is just the weakness of other actors in the zones that they've been going. I mean, we've seen when they're up against individuals that have the capabilities like the Kurds or even the Iraqi military to a certain extent, you know, with the help of U.S. air power, that they're not like unstoppable forces. I mean, they're definitely stoppable. It's just that before there was such a large vacuum and nobody was really able to go against them. I mean, we saw obviously the Syrian rebels do it in January and February this year and have continued to fight them, but they haven't been able to sustain it because they don't have the capabilities to do a two-front war with ISIS as well as with the Assad regime, as well as holding territory and then providing the services too. They just don't have the capabilities. So that's one of the biggest questions I have going forward is sort of, yes, we have these American airstrikes now, but even if there are other forces that can go against them and push them out of certain areas or shrink the territory that they hold, is that sustainable? It was sustainable when there were 150,000 American troops on there with the Sahel movement, and I'm not calling for there to be 150,000 American troops back in Iraq because I think that would be a disaster. But, I mean, the question remains, how sustainable could such a campaign be unless specific Sunni actors in both Iraq and Syria are able to hold territory and be able to govern that territory? Otherwise, it's just going to continue to be chaotic. And it's just going to ebb and flow between certain actors taking over territory, the Islamic State taking it back over, and back and forth necessarily. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens, I guess. Obviously, I can't predict the future.
Yeah, thank you. That was very, very good. Eli.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to refer to the question about the greater strategic picture and what we heard from Ambassador Rosen, the cultural aspect. I think that if we look globally, we see this kind of dismantling of the nation state. Look to what happens in Scotland next week, I think. There is a good chance that Scotland will become independent. And I think several months after that, you will see Catalonia, perhaps independent. You see Belgium, which is practically divided for 1 year, 2 years. You don't have a government. Look to what happens in some South American states with the Indian revival. The autochthones or the original peoples that want kind of independence inside the traditional state. And clearly look to Ukraine, by the way, where you have foreign fighters, not only Russians, but the Russians brought the Chechens and Dagestanis and Tatars to fight against the Ukrainians. So I think that this is a greater picture. Part of it is because globalization, part of it because there is no more fear to fight against the state. As to the ICSR, my impression from what I read, and I don't have good sources like Shiraz or Amro, but from my analysis, there is a big difference between ICSR in Iraq, which is based mainly, on the one hand, on some of the tribes which support them because of their grievances vis-à-vis the government, and the Ba'athist infrastructure of Al-Dura, which gave them a lot of good officers with a lot of experience, and they probably were the planners for this kind of military strategy. On the one hand, in Syria, mostly you have a lot of support of foreign fighters. Many Chechens are there, commanders in the field. And there they use mainly not those kind of columns of taking control of the cities, but a lot of suicide bombings and assassinations of leaders, as we saw, by weakening the leadership and then buying, perhaps even with money. They have a lot of money, buying people through deals, local deals with a village, with a neighborhood, with one of the organizations. And they succeeded in splitting this organization inside Syria.
Yeah, Ambassador Mihaylov, what is your prediction of the
Yes,
situation?
thank you. Ambassador Rosen poses a very important question, and rightly so. He tries to describe this as what Eli said, and I would add that this is indeed a complex cultural and social phenomenon. We cannot view it like stimul and response, like Pavlovian dog. They invite them to fight and dice them and they go. So this is a complex cultural phenomenon with deep roots. But to add to what Eli said, I see two layers in it. The first one is that in society, generally in Europe or in the States, or generally you have much anxiety, much social malaise, much anger, much disparity. So in sort of Fukuyamian sense, we are not coming to the end of history. We are back in the history and the contradictions are there. So you see on this screen a huge anti-globalist, anarchist, third way movement that resembles a bit the hippie movement during the 60s, but it was completely different phenomenon. So you have these new anarchists, let's say on the European screen, which are breeding ground for epiphenomenal appearance of the jihadi call. But beneath this layer, you have another issue, and this is the issue of Evrabia. You have huge Muslim communities in Europe which are not assimilated. En laem it bolelut. And this is a huge issue. So they live in a country, nominally, they are citizens, but psychologically they are not, they didn't go to the melting pot. So this layer beneath, in my humble opinion, is more dangerous than the first layer. And there are no answers. How to apply, let's say, the state's model to make them feel more accepted or more in harmony with society. And this is precisely the breeding ground whereby this radical call or plea may find a ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Amro, do you have anything to say at the end, or nothing? Okay, because we are running out of time. And first of all, I want to thank all the panelists. And one has disappeared, but the others are still there. These were, I learned a lot, I must say. I learned a lot. I also devised a lot of new questions, but this was one of the most interesting sessions I've seen. And thank you very much. Thank you for attending. And yeah,
Thank you.
this was it. Thank you.